Local history, local culture, local events, your community. This is the Joe Kelly Show.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. Frank Tomeno is our guest. Frank is the guy we go to whenever we talk about local history. And continuing from last week, we'll talk about the series that Frank Tomeno is doing on local mayors. And Frank, this is a series that you started back in April?
April,
yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah, yeah. And boy, you're up to modern day mayors
right,
now.
Yeah, I believe we've had 71 mayors, and I wrote about 6 village presidents. We don't know the names of all the village presidents.
You started the series, Frank, in April with Rensselaer?
Jedediah Van Rensselaer, who
Yeah.
was one of the first village presidents we know of. Utica became a village in 1798. In 1848, there was a fire in the Common Council chambers and destroyed all the early records. And so we don't know much about the first village presidents. But
Do we know the name of the first village president, Frank?
Not the first.
No.
We're not sure. No, and I've checked, old newspapers. I just can't find out.
Where do you go to, Frank, for the research that you've done? What are the sources that you've used?
Well, I'd say the main is the public library, the old newspapers. They have the Utica Observer, for instance, going back to the 1840s. They have some issues. I don't know what I would have done without the old newspapers on microfilm. So that's the main source, I would say, for the 19th century ones. Yeah.
And how are you doing now that you're up to modern day mayors? How are you handling the research on them?
Well, the modern days are kind of easy because at the OD we have on microfilm all the all those newspapers, and usually I go to election day to find out what the vote was, and I'll go a few days before election, a few days after election to find get comment, and on some of the 20th century mayors, their obituaries, loaded with good information. So the 20th centuries really haven't been a problem. Some of the 19th century mayors were a problem, only in that many of those mayors came to Utica from out of town, New York City, businessmen, came to Utica. The mayor at that time was a part-time job, paid $200 a year.
We're talking 1800s now, Frank?
Yeah, and before 1853, there was no city hall. So the mayors worked out of their houses, if there were lawyers, out of their offices. And it was, they would come here, some of them, work maybe 5-6 years, be elected mayor for 1 year, and then leave. Where do you get the information? And it was pretty tough. Usually you try to get their obituary, and I was fortunate. I was able to get the obituaries of all these people and get a little information about when they were born, where they were born, that type of thing. Yeah.
Outside of the early village presidents that are lost to history, was there a mayor that you really couldn't find much on at all?
On the mayors, no, I've been pretty lucky on the mayors. And the village presidents that we know of, only because Dr. Moses Bagg in 1892 wrote a memorial history of Utica. It has to be 1,000 pages. It's a huge book, and loaded with information about those early village presidents, where they were born. Sometimes their opponents, sometimes not, because all of them ran for either village president or mayor. Again, there's some disappointments in that. Difficult in the 19th century ones to find the names of their wives, for instance. I was interested in the late 19th century. Utica was really a leader in the women's suffrage movement. I mean, a national leader. And I wanted to know, were the mayor's wives for women's suffrage or against? Actually, there was a large group of women who opposed women's suffrage in Utica. They had their own organization. And
Did they have a name for that organization?
It was the anti-women suffrage organization, believe it or not. And I wanted, did the mayor's wives, were they for or against? Difficult to find information. I mentioned Dr. Bagg's book, just a great book. He contributed a lot to our history. We would have lost a lot of history if it wasn't for him. But I've often mentioned on your show Helen Munson Williams, one of the wealthiest women and really in the world. You could say the founder of Munson Williams Proctor Arts Institute. And in his book, he has a couple of pages on James Watson Williams, her husband. And then at the end, there's 2 lines. He married Helen Munson. They had 2 daughters. So
Mariah and Rachel, right?
Right, Mariah and Rachel, who married the Proctor brothers. But that kind of thing, if I had, this is not, the series I'm doing is not a history of Utica. It's about the mayors. So if I had more time, to spend a month on one, maybe you could do enough research to find out more about the wives. So that's been a little disappointment, but I've enjoyed doing the series. A lot of work, but it's fun.
And you're going to take it up to
Mayor Palmieri. I've emailed all the living mayors, Louis LaPola, Tim Julian, Dave Raffaello, who am I?
Tim Julian.
And Palmieri. But right now I'm working on Ed Hanna. So
a lot of information out there for Ed Hanna, right?
So that's no problem.
Are you limiting, before we go to break, Frank, are you limiting it to a certain amount of words? Do you have it in your head?
Well, no, the OD is not giving me a limit, but on some mayors there's not that much information.
So some have been shorter and others longer.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll take a quick break. Frank Tomato's our guest. We're talking about the series that he's doing for the Observer-Dispatch on all of the Utica mayors. Great series. We're going to take a short break. Right back.